Hey, John, you don't have a PhD, do you?
I do not. I'm saddled with the lowly 6th year in a superintendent certificate.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a disappointment to your audience because the average age of the podcasting team has gone up dramatically this week, and the weight of our academic credentials has gone down.
Yeah, trust me. Well, I'm well below you, so we're doing okay.
Yeah.
But frankly, a lot of people say to me like, oh, I love hearing John's voice at the end. Like they get all the way.
Oh.
So people who delight in the Jonathan Costa outro get to hear him and now see him. If you're on Spotify or YouTube or TikTok, you'll get to see this conversation. So join us there. But
and if you're not, you're probably better off.
No.
Just saying.
He's a devastatingly handsome man. Get over to YouTube and Spotify now. Well, welcome back to the microphones.
Thank you so much, Matt. Many times over the years, we've had this opportunity. I always enjoy it.
Same, 100%. And honestly, it was your brainchild. So,
well,
we are a little bit ahead of where we're going to record, right? As we often will share, Liz is out globe-trotting somewhere. Yeah. I believe in this case, we're projecting that it's a ASCD conference where she will be soon an ASCD published author. But we were thrilled to have Jonathan be able to come in and spend a little time with us. He's just recently penned a really interesting piece about Chesterton's fence, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think the natural place to start any conversation with Jonathan Costa on ChatEDU is about dogs, wouldn't you say?
Of course. It's the go-to topic at any conversation starter in our house, so it's a good place.
Now, one of these days we should record in your office where it is just wall-to-wall.
Dogs.
Describe for the listener what your office looks like from the dog perspective.
There's a wall of dogs.
Yeah.
There's a wall of sort of mixed media, family, golf, etc. And then there are 2 other walls of my wife's fantastic artwork.
Yes, it is fantastic. I have some of it hanging in the entryway to my house, and it makes me smile whenever I see it. That's Wendy Costa. Check her out on Instagram.
Correct. Yes. Alternate reality photos.
Love it. All right, listen, so on the dog front, we've talked a lot about animal-related models, meerkats, whale AI translation, but finally, thank goodness, there is actually a text-to-bark model out there.
I'm fascinated to hear this, and it makes sense that they would start with dogs because most dog communication probably is limited to 3 different messages, so it's pretty easy to nail down.
What do you think those are?
I want to eat.
Yes.
I want to sleep.
Okay.
And I need to go outside and do my business.
Okay.
Those are the 3 most important commands that you will be able to decipher.
Okay. Well, 11 Labs, which we turn to very often for all sorts of interesting, voice translations and sound effects, they are the ones to bring us this very important text-to-bark model. They have a Chihuahua, a Dachshund, and a Golden Retriever. And I'm going to guess that you're going to go Golden Retriever.
Yes, that's the closest to our beloved Vicky.
Oh, wait. Hang on a second. Sorry. So here we go. Their options are close to yours. It is Who's a Good Boy, Dinner Time, and Going to the Park.
Okay.
Which one would you like to hear?
Let's say dinner time.
Okay. And will you, as a guy that's had dogs forever, just check the fidelity first,
I will,
right?
yes. Yep.
It's important that there's no hallucinations. I don't want to hear any bias in this output. Okay, here we go. Here's dinner time. Okay, what'd you think?
Well, it's close to dinner time. It has a hint of the UPS man is here.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm not sure, but it could be either one of those.
A little bit of a minor aggression?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Should we try a Chihuahua just to see?
Sure.
Okay. That's upsetting.
Yeah, because Chihuahuas have, and take it from someone who knows, Chihuahuas have size issues, right? So they are little dogs that desperately want to be big dogs. That might complicate the translation.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, we will, of course, just drop this very important model into the show notes. It will not surprise you that we are recording in the month of April, even though I don't think this is going to be out until the kind of late spring. Any guess, Jonathan, like what particular day in April 11 Labs may have introduced this very important model?
Could it have been the first?
It could have been the first. And I have to say, obviously I'm doing too much cognitive offloading because my critical thinking skills were not engaged. I think I even sent it to you and be like, hey, check this out. And I was like, I went and Googled or Perplexity.
Yeah.
Was that an April Fool's joke? And in fact, it was.
There you go.
Cool. Well, I'm Matt Mervis.
And I'm Jonathan Costa.
And this is ChatEDU, a podcast about AI in education. In today's episode, what are we protecting? AI, learning, and the myth of the good old days. We're bringing in our buddy Jonathan Costa back to these very microphones to explore some of the toughest questions facing educators and society today. First, in the news, John and I will dip into NASA's kind of tough take on generative AI that they released in the spring, including some guidance to chief information officers, generally on the state of this technology. And then, of course, we will go beneath the surface as we revisit good old G.K. Chesterton. And some of you may have remembered we've talked about Chesterton a couple times, but I introduced Jonathan to G.K. It wasn't because his deep Catholic liturgy. I think that you were into
That's
G.K., right? Yeah. So I introduced Jonathan to G.K. Chesterton, and I'd say it's become a bit of an obsession. And so we're going to look at a recent piece that Jonathan has wrote about maintaining traditions, which are the fences in G.K.'s world, versus forging ahead, and we will wrap up with a bright bite.
Nice.
All right. So, Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
And I think this will be an interesting kind of weave into some of GK, right? So in the spring, NASA put out a note to CIOs about some of the more high-risk. I mean, let's remember, NASA is not your typical K-12 school, so they're doing some high-risk things. And then this was picked up in CIO.com. It's an opinion piece. So it's an opinion piece about an actual publication that NASA put out. It is essentially that NASA takes this tough stance on generative AI, declaring that it's unfit for critical safety or research work due to its unreliability. The report outlines several kind of failure modes: hallucinations, poor training data, instruction ignoring, and broken guardrails, and warns that Gen AI is currently more performative than it is trustworthy. So what's your first blush take on that?
My first blush is that it's almost obvious in some ways, and that context really matters. So if you are building a rocket and you're putting people's lives at risk, any one of those failures is life-threatening, and so clearly we shouldn't trust it if that's the case, because there's just too much at stake. If you're trying to get a workout program going, or you want to make a recipe, performative failure is not as big a deal. So just like we'll talk about when we get into Chesterton's fence in a few minutes, context matters. And there are certain applications where I would not trust AI in any way, and others where I wouldn't think twice about using it because the risk of a mistake is inconsequential to the outcome that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I will say my significant other is a fantastic cook. I am such a lucky guy, right? So I would say that making a recipe in my world is a high stakes situation because I really like to eat very good food. I do help, by the way. I'm not like I'm not one of these guys that.
But I'll bet she experiments when she cooks.
Well, it's funny. I cannot get her to use generative AI for recipe stuff, right? We'll take a picture of the fridge and say like, hey, what should we make? Although she doesn't love that either.
Sure.
But no, she just really wants to see those 4 stars from allrecipes.com or 5 stars, whatever the case may be. We may get there, though. But I just want to say there are, context matters. And in my world, recipe, high stakes.
Okay. There you go.
Now, one of the things I enjoyed the most about this piece in CIO.com was this kind of like fictitious conversation they had about a supervisor and an executive and an employee. And so Jonathan and I are going to do a dramatic reading of that just to give you a little bit of flavor. So the setup is try to envision how your management team would react to a human employee who pull these kinds of stunts, right? So here's a scenario. The boss is in his or her office chair with dogs behind them with a problematic employee and the employee's supervisor. So Jonathan, why don't you be the exec?
Is this typecasting? Is this?
Yeah, it is typecasting.
Okay, all right. Here we go.
If anyone's going to deliver the exec like you, it's you.
All right, here we go. You have been doing excellent work lately. You are far faster than your colleagues, and the number of tasks you have figured out how to master is truly amazing. But 20 times over the last month, we found claims in your report that you simply made up. This is just not acceptable. If you promise to never do that again, everything should be fine.
I'm getting slightly triggered here because Jonathan is still my boss, and we've had many performance-related conversations. And I haven't yet. I've been thankful enough to do good work. He hasn't talked to me this way. All right, let's carry on. So actually, boss, this employee has certain quirks, and he is definitely going to continue to make stuff up. So yes, this will not go away. Heck, I can't even promise that this worker won't even make up more stuff more often.
Well, okay, we'll overlook that. But my understanding is that he ignored your instructions repeatedly and did only what he wanted. Can we at least get him to stop that?
No, that's just what he does. We knew that when we hired him.
Okay, very well. But on 3 occasions this month, he was found in the restricted part of the building where workers need top secret clearance. Can you at least get him to abide by our rules?
No, and given that his licensing fee was $5.8 billion this year, we've invested too much to back off.
Okay, let's just go on then.
Nicely done. Right. So I think the listener will get, or the viewer will get, that this is, essentially what some folks are experiencing that AI will do. And we'll unpack it in some detail. I do want to share like a little bit of trauma this morning. I was working with a custom GPT that we have that helps us kind of like identify viral clips. So I have a thing where it's trained on some clips that have done very well. And then I feed it in a new transcript from an episode, and it just helps us like brainstorm. It's a thought partner. It would not follow my GD instructions at all. And I got mad. I kept going back and forth with it, and I get anxious when I get mad because I don't want to get in trouble, blah, blah, blah. But the not following instructions thing, I find more frustrating than the hallucinations thing.
And I find that happens much more often with the image generators than it does with text, with bots. So I am constantly frustrated with image generation. I'll ask it to put a sign behind the image, it will misspell it, and I will actually spell it out, and it will still get it wrong.
Yeah.
I don't find that happens as frequently with text-based instructions.
Good. Well, next time I need some viral video clips, I'm sending you my custom GPT in the last transcript. It's interesting on the image thing. It did finally get better. So the ChatGPT 4.0 with the whole new, it won't be new to the listener now, is the whole Studio Ghibli thing. But it is really interesting. We did this a couple episodes ago with Liz. I don't know if she hung it up here on the wall somewhere, but I was able to just go back and forth. Like it gave her 3 hands, and I said, "How about 2 hands?" And it just fixed it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
check
that out.
And that gets to one of the points that I was thinking of when we were thinking about this story, is that if the image generation is getting better and fixing its mistakes, how far behind would the text be getting better and making fewer mistakes?
Right.
The trajectory, I would hope, would be toward a more reliable future. But again, I think context matters. So if we go back to our cooking metaphor, I think if you're trying to bake a souffle, I wouldn't use ChatGPT, because a mistake in baking requires precision, and you will mess it up, and it will sink, and it will fall, and your souffle will be terrible. If you're in an Italian kitchen and you're making sauce, it's all about fixing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Let's try this, let's try that. It doesn't matter as much because context matters. And I think that is a lesson for any application of AI as we go forward.
You know what else really matters? The ability to watch Jonathan Costa, who has deep Italian roots, do these like little moves that he just made when he's talking about his Italian.
You're talking about gravy, man. You got to use your hands. You got to use your hands.
I love it. You got to come over to the video feed, people. So yeah, I don't disagree. And that will give us a really nice segue. So in just a moment, we will go into the beneath the surface and talk about this Chesterton's piece. Let's break the fourth wall for a second, or let people, peek behind the curtains, whatever the appropriate description is. So John and I are recording this in the spring. Again, it's going to kind of come out in the late spring. And I shared with Jonathan the NASA story, and we talked a little bit about it. And his kind of query to me is, well, what's the chance that the NASA critique about hallucinations, instruction following, access to private data, blah, 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 would still be relevant? Let's say this comes out on June 2nd or 16th or something like that, which is, I think, roughly where we'll be. Will it be better? And so we have a gentle person's bet right now, because unfortunately, my guess is that some things will improve, like the image, kind of back and forth, and we'll see. But, I think John's betting on the fact that hallucinations will be measurably better by the early summer, late spring of 2025. And I'm feeling glass half empty for some reason today and saying it's not.
I just feel like the financial risk with the billions of dollars that are invested in AI, in every economic time. And it's interesting that we're recording at a very volatile time in our economy.
Really? Stuff going on?
Stuff going on. If you check your calendar, look back at what the market did the first week of April. But with that much money on the line, a retrograde regression in terms of hallucination performance will threaten billions of dollars of investment. And so unless there's something built in that makes it worse over time based on other things, I would think that this would be a developer's top strategic priority over time. Why did the image generator get better? Yeah. I'm sure because people were complaining on and on and on about the lack of responsiveness of image generators. Yep, so they got better. If it cuts off a pathway to investment, a pathway to return, Kai-Fu Lee is not spending $1 billion on a model that he thinks is going to hallucinate and ruin his margins. I just think the weight of the economic investment is motivation enough to drive developers to try to increase the reliability of their text-based models. Because if they don't, that money is going to go down the drain, and I just don't think investors are going to stand for it.
Yep. Yeah. I think your thinking is spot on. Luckily, just like there is do you know the large language models have this thing called it's like an arena leaderboard. It used to be called the Limpsys, but that didn't sound like cool enough. So it's now the chatbot arena. So there's actually a similar measure for the rate of hallucinations, and they kind of judge them against models. So we'll make a little mark on the calendar, and the week after this airs, Liz and I will report back, and then we'll figure out who's buying who what.
Excellent.
ChatEDU listener, you're welcome to email. It's chatedvance@edvance.org if you want to suggest what Jonathan should buy for me when he loses.
I think an Italian dinner is probably the best way to go.
With a little gravy. All right. Fantastic.
If you enjoy Matt and Liz's insights on AI and education, don't miss their next 6-week AI and K-12 education micro-credential, launching this summer in partnership with Southern Connecticut State University. This self-paced online course covers AI essentials for educators, from foundational concepts to advanced skills like prompting, AI-driven assessments, and multimedia creation. Each cohort includes 4 live Zoom sessions for hands-on support, and participants earn a Credly digital credential. Visit skills21.org/AI/micro to sign up now. Group discounts are available for schools and districts. We hope you can join us.
So now it is time to go beneath the surface.
All right.
And this is really an opportunity for Jonathan to share a pretty interesting piece that he wrote about our good friend G.K. Chesterton. He will explain all that stuff. And then I will, it's not a secret that Jonathan and I are generally on the same side of the fence here. No pun intended. But I will play devil's advocate and, try to ask some hard-hitting journalistic questions.
All right.
Have at it.
So G.K. Chesterton, a prolific 20th century writer, one of his most enduring contributions was found in a book that he published in 1929 called The Thing. And the subtitle is Why I'm a Catholic.
I had a feeling there was a subtitle.
Yes, which is amusing to me, having gone to a Jesuit university and had my first teaching job at a Jesuit high school and having pretty much oppositional views to everything that is part of that from a religious standpoint. But
you just cut off like 20% of the ChatEDU audience.
I'm sorry.
We're very inclusive people.
I can't bury
Carry
too
on.
long. So anyway,
yep.
But the metaphor is that a person encountering a fence erected across a road and should consider first why the fence is there before acting to remove it as a barrier. And the whole idea is that whenever you go to remove a structure, practice, or rule, it's essential to first understand the original reason for its existence. And so he's basically arguing to protect institutions from destruction, removal, or change until you have thought deeply about the implications and unintended consequences of removing that practice, rule, or structure.
Right. Okay. And the setting is like literally in the book, someone is walking through the woods and they come across a fence the way we might come across a stone wall here in southern New England.
Exactly.
So they come across a fence and before they rip it down, they got to go, is it important? Okay.
Yeah. The issue for me is not that you should carefully consider something before you act. That is always a good idea. In just about every aspect of long-range planning, strategic thinking, careful consideration of the outcomes of your actions are fine. The challenge here, though, is that I believe in many circles, the metaphor of a fence has sort of morphed into a moat.
That's interesting.
So we're not going to just carefully consider it. We are going to marshal the forces and protect it at all costs. So I see this fence. It makes me happy because it provides boundaries for me, and I don't have to change anything about anything I do, because if I protect the fence, I don't have to change the way I think. I don't have to change the way I act. I don't have to change anything I'm doing. I can stay with the status quo, and I'm going to defend it whether it deserves to be removed or not. So Chesterton's fence, as a metaphor, is in danger of morphing into Chesterton's defense. I am not changing this. We're going to keep you out at all costs. And I think that position is as flawed as the previous one. So if you refuse to consider what a removal or changing of the fence looks like, you're in just as precarious a position as someone who removes it without thinking.
Yeah, I mean, without going too much into the Catholicism piece, it almost like reveals his context, right? So religion is clearly
right,
kind of wrapped up in almost the way you're describing.
Sure,
the fence becomes your belief system.
Exactly. I'm sure he was not a fan of Vatican II.
Okay. All right. So now let's come from this kind of 15,000 foot epistemological down to AI. So what are the fences in your world when it comes to teaching, learning, assessment, core skills, all that good stuff?
So the way this comes up more than anything is around the debate or the consideration of how much factual knowledge does a student need in a specific area to gain a contextual handle on the reason for learning that stuff.
Okay.
Secondary English teachers who are concerned about what the existence of AI as an assistant in the writing process will do to a student's ability to think and learn to write.
Because writing is thinking.
Writing is thinking. The challenge is uncoupling the rote skills and the thinking skills. Mm-hmm. So if you jump from writing to reading and you think about decoding as a skill that you need, is decoding thinking, or is decoding simply one pathway as an introduction to the content that makes you think? So if I listen to War and Peace on an audiobook, am I less a student than if I read it? Is reading as a fence the issue, or is it the processing and thinking about and reacting to the content that's the fence? And oftentimes they get conflated. So if I can't read, does that mean I can't think? And people will equate decoding with thinking. So, there was a very provocative TED Talk that I watched the other day about your grandchildren will be the first generation that does not need to read and write because of the explosion of tools that allow content to be delivered in a variety of different ways. So is decoding a requirement to the thinking that goes into reading and comprehending, or is it just a vestigial skill that you could do without if you had other ways to interact with the content?
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. And it's really interesting, the timing of this, because Jonathan and I have been having this Chesterton's conversation for about 9 months, I would say. But the explosion, literally the explosion of the podcast, the AI-generated podcast, so the ability to take any piece of content and turn it into a podcast. It's in Microsoft's Copilot. It's in Brisk. It's in Gemini. It's in Notebook LM. It's in 11 Reader. I mean, anybody who has a tool right now, it's in several industry-specific vertical tools. So you could argue, and you and I do this all the time. I don't have time to. I almost sent you one this morning because I didn't have time to read something. So I turned it into a 4-minute podcast because I don't have the attention span for the 11-minute podcast. But, and I've already developed the skills for the decoding. So we got to talk about that piece a little bit too. Yeah. But it is curious that the podcast, AI-generated podcasting has exploded, right? Because it is essentially allowing people to access content and knowledge and do reasoning and thinking and analysis through stuff that they're listening to. Don't think it makes the world's best classroom learning management environment, but let's
sure.
Right. So, let's for a second even just concede that might be the case, that I can, digest all this stuff with new technology audibly, and I can understand and master the content and even do some analysis. So go back to writing, though.
Yep.
So can you...
Sure. So on the writing side, is your knowledge of vocabulary, your knowledge of grammar, your knowledge of spelling, all the sort of rote stuff you need as foundational to actually compose, how much of that is required to be a good composer? So if I can stream of consciousness talk into a bot and give it a chain of thought reasoning argument and have it generate the text to fill in that outline, is the fact that I have I didn't have the vocabulary to express it in a certain way, is that the test of thinking, or is it the logic and reasoning behind the argument that you are after? Because the difference is profound. Folks who push back against AI in writing will say that, you're making it too easy. But if you look at the history of writing composition, it has never been static. And oftentimes the argument comes from a mistaken position that it has been static. People think about writing with a pen in a blue book in response to an essay question. But the vast majority, and when I say vast, I mean 99% of all human writing right now.
Right, because we're stuck in this little window right now where we're sort of obsessed with the way we do something.
Right, uses tools that have emerged over the last 30 years to make it easier to bring your composed thoughts to writing. So, if you go back all the way back, right, for 99% of human history, we were oral storytellers. Then we went to cuneiform symbolic writing, and then to alphabetic writing. And only in the last 50 years, when you go from a manual to an electric typewriter, and then to word processing, and then to spell check, and then to grammar check, then to sentence completion, now to full AI composition, that escalator of assistance, has that made people worse thinkers or just less able to construct writing from scratch? And who really cares? If I can do the work of the cognition, of making the argument, of piecing together my thoughts in a way that makes sense, and I ask someone else to pull words in to help me express it, how is that bad? I mean, what would you do with all the time you saved by getting to that point rather than working on building vocabulary, all the rules and structures that we teach kids in elementary school around the framework of writing? What would you do with that saved time? And when I was thinking about this, I was reminded of a conversation I had with a group of world language teachers. And the argument was, if we don't spend time learning vocabulary, kids will never be able to express themselves in a second language. So we have world language programs where kids are studying for 5 years to build their vocabulary, and they can't converse in a restaurant to order something because they've got 10,000 disconnected words and have never used it in context. Versus a world language program that focuses on the 500 most used conversational words. Let's build that and then start using them.
Yeah, we've been looking at a program. One of the school districts where we're doing a lot of work is they have a tool called Speakology, I think. It's very much like, we've modeled a lot in keynotes and professional learning, the ability to use advanced voice models to just do conversational skill development. And so Speakology takes that the next step, and there's an avatar on the screen that you can look at and have conversation. So you could easily imagine a world where you're building a lot of fluency and a lot of context and competence without doing all that kind of mechanical, I don't want to call it knowledge development, but it's kind of like discrete skill development taught out of the context of a useful application. But I just want to be clear, like you're essentially, arguing for something that sounds like a post-literate world, right? I'm not saying it's devoid of thought. Like it's got lots of deep insights and analysis and intelligence, and it saves time, and maybe we'll do cooler things. But these fundamental skills of reading and writing you're proposing, as you look at the sweep of time, are just going to change, and we need to kind of get jiggy with it.
Yeah, I think if you took the position that you don't need to teach reading and writing, that's just a bridge too far right now.
Okay.
And it's too provocative and will just cause just too much pushback.
You are an executive director of an agency, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But if we were to say what is the line? How much do you really need to know? And I'll go back to the world language example. Why would a kid take a second language? Yeah, I would hope that the instructional approach aligns with the goal, which is to use a second language, to enjoy the second language, and to be motivated to learn it more. So I think the faster you get to the reason for your course in the first place, the more likely you are to meaningfully engage students in the content that's most important for them to retain and be able to apply. And, I know from my own practice, I use these tools in my own writing, and my writing has improved as a result of those tools, and it's gotten faster as a result of those tools.
So more time for golf, basically?
Yes, or talking to Vicky in her native language. So either one.
So, but this is messy, right? So you're saying, I follow what you're saying. And so we're moving towards post-literate, but we don't want to go there too quickly because we're going to freak everybody out. But it's inevitable to happen. So how in God's name are we going to measure any of this stuff? So just to hold that thought for a second, you and I were just at a conference where we heard Jonathan Haidt speak, right? And he did the Haidt thing where he's like, it's funny that it's Haidt, and because all it is like this trajectory of crap, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that goes up is mental health problems, and all the academic measures go down. Now, it might very well be that those academic measures of reading and writing and literacy, and actually there's a global literacy crisis right now because everybody's writing's going down. Maybe they're all getting smarter on TikTok, and we just don't know it. I mean, that's talk about provocative, but let's say you're right and that we're moving towards a world where the hologram is going to make us wicked smart, in my native Massachusetts dialect. But how are we going to measure this?
Well, not the way you're measuring it now.
Yeah, right.
Because, this is true, in my opinion, of any system that has a huge upfront lift of rules and processes leading to an application. Mathematics, language, and you name it. What is the point where knowledge of the thing enables the application of the thing? And how much do we need to know to get to that point? My Chesterton's fence argument is that the current method of teaching and learning vastly overstates the amount of foundational rote learning required to apply the knowledge in context. And kids know it, and they're voting with their feet in their brains. Because if these tools are out there that allow them to do a certain set of things faster or easier, and we're telling them, no, 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 you can't use them, it's for your own good, some will follow along obediently, but the size of that group is going to grow smaller by the year, and we're going to lose them. And I totally am on board where there is absolutely a foundational set of understandings that you need first, but I believe that the pathway there can be much shorter than it was traditionally believed to be prior to the digital age, certainly prior to the age of AI, and that whatever measurements we apply ought to be focused on the product and not the process. So all of the reduction that you're speaking of in terms of testing, how much of that testing is on the arcane rules and foundations and not on the thinking? So my dear mom, who passed away a few years ago, was a librarian. And we used to have a fight or a discussion on the difference between reading something on a page and a Kindle. I mean, that's how deeply connected she was to the printed word and the printed page. She really believed with all her heart that if you read As I Lay Dying in a book, you'd have a different experience than you would on a Kindle. If I said to her, I listened to it in the car, she'd probably, have some sort of medical challenge. So, this has been around for a long time. And I really think those that cling to the fence have more of a romantic connection to how they learned than they are thinking about how their students need to learn.
Sure, right. That's the historic trap. We all went to school, so that's our lens. This feels kind of narrow, not on purpose, but the conversation so far is about reading and writing, right? So let's say you're going to work for Boeing and you're going to be an engineer, and your job is to, I don't know, say like not have the doors fly out of the airplane at indiscriminate moments.
Yeah.
So there's, blueprint design and CAD and, all sorts of other modalities in which you're demonstrating intelligence that aren't pure literacy, but they're literacy adjacent. How does this shake out in that kind of world?
So there is no substitute for fluency. So if you're going to be an engineer and life depends on it, there are knowledge bases that you need to be fluent in, and that takes effort and work, and there is no shortcut to that. I mean, there may be foundational things like, engineers used to know how to use a slide rule. They don't have to do that anymore. They can use a calculator. And when AI is good enough and hallucination-free enough, they may not even need the calculator. So there's always been an escalator, even in areas of profound expertise.
Okay.
Medicine is another example.
Yep.
So Harvard Medical School many years ago shifted their focus of instruction from learning every muscle in the body to learning the muscles in the hand or the arm and learning them to fluency, and then trusting that the doctor could transfer his knowledge of the pectoralis muscle to the gluteus maximus muscle because it's a muscle,
right,
and muscles work the same. So there are examples in our history of, even in areas of expertise, of people taking shortcuts around some of it because the weight of everything that needs to be known is just growing so fast. There's no way to keep up. So you are put in a position where you have to leverage these tools to be successful.
Okay, so there is foundational knowledge, there's domain expertise, et cetera, et cetera. It's funny because you in this camp would be called an accelerationist in the field, right? So you're kind of imagining the wave of AI and trying to ride ahead of it and see its benefits. I might be a little bit of a decelerationist, although I'm, generally I'm very fascinated by the pace of change. I'm going to jump ahead of you 3 steps now and say, well, what if all these companies are right, Sam Altman and Satya Nadella and all them, about artificial general intelligence and robotics, right? So in that world, I'm just thinking about the engineer. If there's a place where the AI is as bright as any engineer needs to be in order to do all the things they need to do, and there's a robot that can do those things, then where are we? Like, how does a superintendent think about the purpose of schooling in a world where, I mean, this is a different episode.
No, but I mean, it is, but it's an important thing to think about. I mean, what is uniquely human about engineering? I don't think it's the knowledge of engineering. It's what is engineering used for? What problems can engineering solve? What curious applications are there of this engineering knowledge we have to improve, accelerate, expand, just make our world a better place? I think if you are in a universe where all middle level and lower knowledge work is being done by a robot or a chatbot or some large language model, then where do you find your value? And it's going to be in something that is uniquely human. And if you lack anything that is uniquely human, that has a value in the economic system that we're in, you're going to be in a tough spot.
Yeah. Interestingly, too, it will be tied probably until you're into your own personal purpose and passions. Right now, Liz is about to finish this book on personal interest projects, which is a book about how do schools tap into the skill set and operationalize this technology. I mean, what if that is the thing that we actually do with our time, because all the other things of economic value are being done by, AGI-enabled systems. So, think about buying Liz's personal interest project book, not for tomorrow, but for 5 years. It's a little survival guide.
When you first started saying about Liz finishing something, knowing where she is right now, what I thought you were going to say is like macrameing a backpack or something, something like that.
Which would be her pip. But
exactly.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so coming back to 2025, super provocative and interesting, and I think you probably are generally right? I mean, I don't see how this isn't true, that we're going to see new modalities, new technologies enable ways in which people are smart, thoughtful, can tap into personal passions, et cetera, et cetera. How do you guide a superintendent right now, right? So again, you see this thing coming, the measures that we currently have don't work. What's the navigable channel here? What steps do you take?
I think it's just supporting the notion of curiosity. It's okay to ask questions about the fence and trust that smart people, when they ask those questions in a thoughtful and supportive way, they'll find what the rationale is for keeping it, removing it, or adapting it and changing it. I think the only bad answers are, we'll never talk about the fence, or we need to immediately remove the fence.
Right.
Any other dialogue about what, how, when, where, to what degree is all important and ought to be supported locally. I think the biggest educational question of our time is the answer to the question, how much do we really need to know before we can do? And I don't know what the answer is, and it might be different in writing than it is in reading, than it is in math, than it is in engineering. But I know what we are pretending it is currently is not in sync with where our reality is. And so there needs to be a recalibration of that. And we've talked before, and we'll always talk about vulnerable and durable, and how durable activities take more time. The only way to find that time is to look at that balance between what do you need to know before you do. And if we can accelerate getting to the do part by saving time on what is required foundationally, I think we can build some room where we can see some true instructional change to uniquely human, durable activities occurring more frequently in classrooms all over.
Yeah, well said. Love it. Are you planning to publish this thing? Where's this going?
It is planned to be published in a journal called Ed Elements, probably this summer.
Okay, fantastic. Book on the way?
No book on the way currently. Okay. That might be a retirement project. I have a couple of other pressing responsibilities in the meantime.
I can't imagine.
Yes.
Gosh, not a lot.
There's nothing going on right now. So it's this executive director's job is, kind of interesting right now.
Let's take 2 seconds on that because I don't think the world's going to be much, much different. I mean, God knows, but any advice to? I'm completely honored, flattered, appreciative that we have a fairly high number of district decision makers, superintendents, associate superintendents, principals that listen to ChatEDU. You're in an executive leadership position right now. Any insights about navigating the water and steps that you think folks ought to take in the here and now? And we'll kind of move from thinking about the next 5 years, which is sort of the Chesterton's picture, to the spring, summer, and fall.
Well, unfortunately, I'm just going to give you the cliche answer. I think in times when you are buffeted from all sides with uncertainty, it is never more important to be clear about your North Star, about where you're trying to get to, because without that grounding, you are inevitably going to lurch from one reaction to another. So given the circumstances in front of you, what are the most important outcomes that, if you're in a district, you want for students? And how are your daily decisions aligned with that vision? Because if you don't have that grounding, you are simply going to be whipsawed with every new piece of news that could be either disquieting or celebratory. And that's a really hard place for people to be when they are in an organization that doesn't really know where it's going.
Yeah. And I imagine, as complicated as the situation is, still find a little time to get on your bike, play around a golf.
Scratch your dog behind the ears.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Yep. Jonathan, it is, we're not done, but I will just say it is always really awesome to have you on the other side of this mic.
Thanks. Yeah. I enjoy it.
All right, awesome. Now it is time for a little bright bite, because at the end of each week, during these particularly interesting times that we live, we just like focusing, and this is true for AI as well, right? I mean, this whole conversation that we just had with Jonathan, fascinating as it is, speaks to some deeply held beliefs, concerns that folks have. AI is forcing us to ask tough questions, sometimes raise some serious doubts about where we're going. And I find it super helpful week after week after week to say something about a positive contribution where AI is helping us in terms of our health, the economy, the environment. And we have had scores of stories now. And I say to Liz all the time, finding like the most enjoyable thing of this podcast outside of hanging out with folks like you and Liz is curating the stories. Like I love every week just thinking like, what are the kind of 3 juicy stories we dig into? Finding a bright bite each week, not a problem. Yeah. So this week is, again, this is a little bit dated. This is from the spring as well. Stanford Medicine News Center, a newly discovered peptide that rivals Ozempic. John, do you have a problem with your weight?
So I don't have a problem, but it is a constant and relentless battle, because as we age, you can do the exact same thing, be as active, eat the same thing year over year, and you're going to lose muscle and gain weight.
And you obsessively deal with that. Ozempic has not been on your radar.
It has been.
Oh, come on, John.
No, I mean, it has been on my radar only because I wonder about when I'm 75 and can't ride a bike 3,000 miles a year, if I want to still drink wine and eat pasta with that sauce and gravy, what am I going to do?
I've seen your 90, how old your dad? 90 what?
95.
Yeah, I'm not worried about you. Right. But I have, like, I've got a very close friend that, for all sorts of reasons wound up, kind of morbidly in trouble, right, with his weight, and wound up using Mounjaro, I think, or something like that. And it has been remarkable, right? It's been such a gift for him, for his family, for his children, in all sorts of ways. And so I've been fascinated about the topic, and I saw this story pop up. So Stanford researchers have used AI to discover something called BRP. So this is like a naturally occurring amino acid. It's a peptide that reduces appetite, body weight in mice and pigs so far. That's where they've studied that, not in golden retrievers. And it has less side effects than Ozempic, right? So Ozempic does have some tough side effects, nausea, constipation, muscle loss, to your point. So BRP works through a different brain-specific pathway targeting appetite control in the hypothalamus, right? As a history teacher, I'm like way over my punching weight here. But the team used this really cool kind of AI tool called the peptide predictor. So it analyzed 20,000 human protein coding genes to identify biologically active peptides. So this is a process that's been way too complicated for traditional lab methods, and BRP emerged as a top candidate. And that's what we see a lot with these bright bite stories, right? The ability of these larger analytical AI or vision-based systems to take tons and tons of data and do things that are remarkable in terms of detecting, anything from detecting a cancer cell in the body to detecting a wildfire from a satellite using AI to be able to process all that data. So we love these bright bites.
And this is a great example going back to our original, role play at the beginning of the episode. Mm-hmm. If you believe that hallucinations are of such a threat, then the application of a large language model to help find a scientific breakthrough would be reduced, right? I can't do this. It's not, this is science. It can give you an answer and you can test it.
Yep.
And look, it seems to work.
Yep. These analytical AI systems tend to be a little bit less on the LLM side, right? And more on the big data set. But we've covered a couple bright bites where the hallucinations in the application of science wind up leading to discoveries, right? Because they just do these unpredictable things. So 100%. No, I think you're absolutely right.
Context always matters.
Context is king or queen. All right, Jonathan, you listen to the podcast every now and then. I'd say pretty much every Friday by 6:30 a.m., I have a text of some kind, with some reflection on the podcast, like this one's stuck. No, I'm just kidding. There's a very important thing happen. Bright Bite's done. We're getting ready. So what is the very last thing that Liz does?
Roll the credits.
Nicely done.
As always, we'd love to hear what you think. So please let us know at ChatEDU@edadvance.org. That's EDADVANCE.org. And also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are using. ChatEDU is brought to you by EdAdvance, the nonprofit regional education service center in Litchfield, Connecticut. This episode of ChatEDU is sponsored by the National Center for Next Generation Manufacturing. ChatEDU is recorded, edited, and produced by Andre Angelo and Justin Pasco, whose dedication and expertise bring our discussions to life. ChatEDU's executive producer is the multi-talented rock star Cameron Audia. Additionally, we are grateful for the support of our colleague Gary Robinson, and we appreciate his time and talents. And of course, a big ChatEDU shout out to our fearless leader and executive director, Jonathan Costa, for inspiring the pod. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey exploring the thoughtful and innovative integration of AI in education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Costa, and I am the executive director at EdAdvance, and I want you to know how much we appreciate our listeners. If you enjoyed the podcast, feel free to explore EdAdvance's other AI services, which include customized professional learning of all kinds, conferences, and our micro-credential co-sponsored by the Southern Connecticut State University Office of Workforce and Lifelong Learning. Just visit skills21.org/AI to learn more. That's all for now, and thank you again for listening to ChatEDU.